And welcome back, everyone, and welcome to the panel. If the previous panel was decidedly on my left, with this panel, I think I should be sitting on that side, and they should be on my right. But nevertheless, this is, and I know this panel was saying they're a little bit intimidated to follow the previous panel. I have no doubt that they will surpass it, because these are the ones with real power and really driving the economy, if we believe mining is still a large contributor to South African GDP. But as the introducer has suggested, there are serious regulatory problems. So first up, Lily Newpin, with extensive experience providing legal and regulatory advice, is a lawyer. Lily, over to you, 10 minutes.
Thank you. So, hello, I unfortunately missed the initial panel, so I'm feeling even more intimidated than what I've heard, from what I've heard. I am a mining and environmental lawyer. I'm specializing for the past over 10 years in mining and environmental law. So I guess my view may be slightly jaundiced, and also I think dependent on whether times are good or times are bad, because when times are, you often will see more M&A activity, and when times are good, and a lot more litigation when times are not. So I guess that needs to be borne in mind, that I'm a lawyer, so people come to me when there are problems or when they would like to do deals. Secondly, I think what is important to note is what happened with the previous regime. And when I say previous regime, I'm talking about Zwane, the Zwane period. I've seen a number of ministers come and go, but I think the most, the clearest one is for us to look at the Zwane era versus the Mantashe era. And I'm not too sure what the previous panel said, but I think everybody's kind of holding thumbs that Mantashe stays. Well, at least I know from my input. So the previous era, the Zwane era, there was a massive trust deficit, as I'm sure you've heard that catchphrase quite often. There is, it was the state versus the industry. And I think there was a lot of litigation, and there was a lot of uncertainty, and policy being made without much engagement at all. And I know the Minerals Council was at loggerheads a lot of the time as a result of this, because there was no open door or ability to be able to engage with the state and with the department. And hence my practice was predominantly litigation at that stage. Because there was no ability to engage with the departments, we had to go to court in order to get things done. So, for example, we're waiting for a Section 11 approval to transfer a right from one company to the next. There's problems, there's issues, there's just nothing happening, so we go to court to get it done. Now, there seems to have been a serious shift, at least from my perspective and from my client's perspective. It seems as though there is a willingness to engage. There is more of an open door policy from a regulatory perspective, there's no longer this us and them. Well, maybe not fully us and them, but there's definitely more of a compromise. And I think that this has become clear through the publishing of this new mining charter as well, where there was significant engagement, unlike with the Zwane charter, where it was just basically published, and this is what you will do. There has been in this new 2018 charter more engagement. You can definitely see that a couple of the points that were raised as part of public participation have in fact been included. Not all of them, but the understanding from my perspective, from my clients, from the industry, and I mean, you may hear a totally different view from the Minerals Council, has been that there is at least some kind of working document. I have no doubt that you will explain why it is in the process of being reviewed, but there is this court application resulting in a review of the mining charter currently. But the general vibe, if I could say, is that there definitely is a working document in place which will assist with this transformation in the industry. I think what is important to understand is, I guess, where the minister and the leadership at this stage comes from. And I think that is why there's this more engaging arena basically, the minister, he's been drawn from a community activist and trade union background. His mindset is therefore more surrounded or related to the people and to communities. And you'll see a big shift in the mining charter, particularly around community programs and community projects and free carry, or it's now carried interest, being provided to communities and as well as employees. I think his strategy at the moment is very much around relationship building and engagement, and I think that is from his past, his negotiation skills and trade unionist relationship that he has. I just noted a couple of points that from the mining charter particularly, where this is apparent, is that Mr. Mantashe has brought in local content, which is bringing in communities and entrepreneurs from your host communities or your local communities, greater stakeholder engagement. There seems to, again, have been less of a fight with the state and the departments and more of an engagement process. And I use this word engagement a lot, but it seems to be what we are experiencing. So I don't think we can underestimate the long road that we have ahead of us, and the fact that this mining charter document and other documents, for instance, there's this rehabilitation financial provision documents that were draft that was published last week, perhaps the week before, the Friday before, for draft comment. There's further, I got an invitation this morning to a stakeholder workshop to say, here, this draft is there, but we would like to engage with you further before it's finally published. So I think that there is a long road, and I think that there are still a couple of hiccups in the charter, in these financial provision regulations, in the regulation and regulatory environment in general. But I definitely think, from my perspective, that we are on the right track, and that we are moving more towards an understanding with the state and with the department, as opposed to a constant battle that we've seen in the past. One point that I do think should be noted is that over-regulation, and I'm speaking as a lawyer, over-regulation of an industry is often dangerous. So I think that, that we're going to have to try and determine and work out a balance between what industry requires versus what the communities are looking for as well. I could speak on, but I will stop there.
Oh, carry on.
You will have another 2 minutes, Lily.
Oh, I do have.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, basically, I think my whole point is basically to try and create this balance between industry and the social aspects of state versus the economic aspects. And I'm sitting between the economic side of things and the social side of things. So this may be a good time for me to hand over.
Before you hand over, one quick question.
Yeah.
Are you really convinced that the current minister is so much about engagement and consultation? I suspect the people in Kolobeni won't agree with you.
Well, interesting point. Unlike any other minister, he got in his car and he drove to Kolobeni in fact, I think 4 times. He was met with resistance, but the fact of the matter is he at least attempted to engage.
Sure.
So I think his mindset is there.
Well, some people would say he drove there to get them arrested, but I mean that's a different point. We can have that debate different.
I think just one point to note as well is that I'm speaking very much to what the documentation says,
Sure.
and what my experience is. The practical side of things relating to communities and the Minerals Council involvement may be different. So bear that in mind, that I interpret legislation and I advise on it, but the practical side of it may be different.
We can have a bit of a debate after this, but that's okay. Stephen Piri, CEO of the Royal Bafokeng Platinum.
What do you want from me?
The reason I want from you, the reason you're here.
Yeah, it's been a long journey, and it's still going to be a long journey to start seeing the mine industry taking a position which it's supposed to take. but certainly there is some direction which has been shown, especially under Gwede. I had the fortune of being part of the negotiations of Mining Charter 1, to a lesser extent Mining Charter 2, to a full extent Mining Charter 3, and I know the dynamics, the political dynamics that accompanied those charters. You had a Pumzile era, and she had nothing, and she had to transform the industry, and you could see there was a political will at the time, with the mining industry, communities, unions coming together, coming with a product which to a large extent did work. And there was Mining Charter 2 under Susan Shabangu. Similar, there was full consultation in the process, and it was an industry document. You know, it was not a government document. So it was a social compact which enjoined all the parties to the provisions of the charter, and they considered themselves bound by the charter itself, especially Mining Charter 1, which was signed by all the participants, all the stakeholders. So it was a contractual relationship rather than a regulatory relationship. In the process, there came the Zwane era, which is better not spoken about. I have serious problems with that man, and I'm short of words to describe the kind of animal he was.
You're not alone.
So, and may his soul rest in peace where he is. Gwede came, really gave us some hope. When you find a mess, it is expected of you to be the solution to the mess. The problem is, it takes 1 minute to put down this building. It takes years, months and years to build it again. So it was never going to be an easy task for Gwede to rebuild the trust, to rebuild the investor confidence, the industry confidence in what they are doing themselves, and to facilitate competitiveness. I'm saying he has not succeeded, but he is succeeding, because he's trying quite well. The will is there to change things. And I do think that the president has been supporting quite well, because from the Mineral Council side, we have been speaking to the president also, without undermining Gwede, just to test whether there is a political will and a political support on the side of the government, the ruling party, and indeed there is. We should not be naive to think that there is no contestation within the ruling party about certain provisions of the charter and the mining laws themselves, because there are also personal interests, and Gwede is having it as tough as you can imagine in the ruling party itself. I mean, when he comes to present things, there's certainly a challenge about certain things that he wants to implement, certain changes that he wants to implement. So therefore, I think there is a future, but the future can not be determined only by Gwede and the DMR. All of us should map the way and track ourselves forward to the future. It cannot be done by one person. This is a stakeholder effort to bring change to the mining industry. We should be up there as one of the top mining jurisdictions in the world. We're not performing quite great, and Hank will certainly talk about where we are ranked now as a mining jurisdiction. We perform quite badly, courtesy of Zwane, of course. He destroyed this country, this industry, terribly. Now, let me talk about the regulatory regime first before I go to practically what's happening on the ground. We have Mining Charter 3. It's not a perfect document. It was never going to be a perfect document when you had 1,000 people in the room negotiating that document. because everyone wants his or her own share in the document there. But having said that, it's something that at least we can live with, subject to certain changes and negotiations taking place or certain clauses. I can just mention only two. If you look at, we have won the battle on once empowered, always empowered, the continuing consequences clause. That once you acquired a mining license, you did it because you qualified in terms of all the requirements that are needed for a mining permit. It cannot be then that when an empowered person realizes value and sells out, you have got to redo it again. So that's virtually what the mining industry said. The matter unfortunately ended up in court and we got judgment in our favor on that point itself, which government is appealing. But I think we are confident that we've got good prospects of success on that. But the Mining Charter 3 came, which reinforced the continuing consequences provision, at least with regard to existing rights. But what it did not do was to apply continuing consequences principle on transfers and renewals of licenses, which becomes a problem because you want security of tenure, and an investor, wherever he or she is, wants to know that this mining company in which I'm investing has got longevity, and therefore I can invest in that company. If I've got a 30-year life of mine license, but I'm in my 20th year, I've got 10 years remaining until I apply for renewal. Somebody wants to invest in me. He says, but I can't invest in this guy. I'm not sure whether he's going to get a license, but he has invested capital in a mining layout for the rest of the life of the resource. Because there's a difference between life of the resource and life of mine. Life of mine relates virtually to the license itself. So it becomes a problem because when you develop a mine, you cannot do it piecemeal. You develop infrastructure with a view of mining out the resource to the extent that you will be able to. And 30 years expire, you still have another 30 years to mine, of the resource to mine. And then you've got to do it again because you are not sure that you're going to get a license. And you've got to do it again. They said, okay, you empowered so-and-so. Here is a queue of guys. Empower these guys. They're waiting in the queue too. So you are rich. Go away. So, so you're going to have a queue of empowerment needy people all the time when you apply for a license. That does not give you certainty. An investor requires that certainty. So that is problematic. Similarly to the transfers, I've got a license, I'm selling it to you, with everyone, with the employees, and one of you say, aha, we got you, do it again. We see that empowerment, it was Steve's empowerment, not yours, so do your own empowerment. So it becomes a problem. It creates serious uncertainty there. But we are speaking to the DMR. We have spoken to them, and we are speaking to them, unfortunately. And what creates a perceived uncertainty is the fact that under PAJA, our period to lodge an application was expiring, and then we'd have to apply for condonation. So we had to file that application for review of this clause. Unfortunately, some people did not take kind to it, but virtually, if you may, this creates certainty because it will once and for all clarify that this disagreement as far as renewals and transfers are concerned. So other than those few clauses which are a bit problematic, I think the charter is something that we can deal with, we can work on, and indeed we have told government that. It is not our intention to challenge the whole charter as the industry. There are challenges more serious than the charter. Communities have become conscientized, which is not a problem. But what is the problem is the crooks that are taking advantage of communities, the plights of communities, that threaten mining companies themselves. And you see it more in Mpumalanga, in the coal area, where every day there is blockage of roads and what a few people are clamoring for procurement, but are using the activists in the community to fight. And guess what? Once you start talking, he's the one who wants that contract, that tracking contract. So it becomes a problem. So that's what creates instability in mining operations. Clearly, ESCOM is a problem, especially in the smelting and refining industries themselves. That creates an uncertainty on investment. But I need to talk more about the burdens that we carry, the cost burdens that we carry. There's SLP cost that we carry. Virtually, we have taken over the responsibility of municipalities which are dysfunctional or non-existent at all. It's a huge cost on the shareholder. But equally, we pay mining royalties. There's corporate tax that we pay. Labor costs are rising, but then there's mechanization that should come in and innovation, and there's a pressure about people are going to be losing jobs, and there's got to be a balance in that regard. Electricity costs are going up exponentially. Water, besides being scarce itself, the costs are going up themselves. The president yesterday or Sunday signed, Carbon Tax Act. It's another cost that's going to come. So the pressure is quite hard on mining companies. It's companies that can manage their costs and remain cost competitive in the left-hand side of the cost curve so that they can keep a healthy margin that will survive and be sustainable. So it's a very, very tough industry. How much time do you have? Let me stop here. I see I've exceeded my 10 minutes.
Thank you very much, Steve. Henk Langenhoven from the Minerals Council.
Yeah. You don't have a question for me?
Not yet.
I don't really know where to start. Just to give you an idea to latch onto what Steve is saying about the costs, if you analyze, and we've now developed a proper input cost index for mining, not the PPI, an input index, that more than 60% of our intermediary cost, if you leave labor aside, is actually administered prices. So it's ESCOM, it's fuel, it's Transnet, it's the harbor, etc. And if you read the history books of mining, it is everything, all the time. I mean, the 1922 strike, you can go through the history books, all about managing costs. And I know, I mean, you certainly know about the old saying from de Kiewiet that South Africa progresses politically by disaster and economically by windfall. In mining, it's particularly true because of innovations like rock drills and stepping over the gold standard, etc., etc. So it is very difficult for us to control costs. And you know as well as we do, the SOEs are not the shining light of the South African economy. And we're watching ESCOM with fear in our eyes because we buy 30% of ESCOM's electricity and we provide 60 to 70% of their primary energy. So we, in a sense, on both sides, we want cheap electricity, but we need to sell coal, and then you have all the lobbies on top of that. But I want to go back to the president and our minister. The president at the mining in Durban this year, first time in 25 years that the president actually arrived and gave a speech, made two fundamental statements. The first one was he thanked us and congratulated us that we were fighting. I mean, at one stage we had 4 court cases. We talk about lawfare. It's not warfare, but it's something close to that. But secondly, he said, now you have all our attention. And then he gave us the 10 commandments, etc., which we responded to, our president, Mgojo, responded to, of which some of them we are doing very well, some of them are challenges, and Steve has mentioned some of that. Now, the second, just to give you an idea of the change of heart, when I spoke to Lucy Villa from Moody's, she said exactly the same thing as one of your panelists said, but show me the data. You won't see the data. You won't see it for a while. But the question I think that many people are asking is, are there change taking place? I had an old professor that always said you have to start thinking differently, and then it takes about 5 or 6 or 10 years before it actually happens. That message for me is the crucial message. That is happening. with us and the minister and with the presidency. And Minister Gordon, and we have a very good relationship with him because of Eskom, said the other day, but Mantashe is fighting all the time with us in cabinet. And the minister said to us as well, I'm fighting with you, us, but I'm fighting for you in cabinet, which is I think we don't know how it was before, but which is a huge change. And then maybe the other important statement to make is, we got the feeling that the regulatory role of the DMR was all it concentrated on. I mean, we had bad injury and death records. We have done a lot about that. And I mean, if you read the history books, the mining sector is sort of seen as facilitating the apartheid system. So there are many things that you can criticize us for. But the changes that are taking place and that we are trying to facilitate is to shift away from the regulatory side, and we are not saying forget about it. We are doing a huge amount of work on the pension stories and the TB, et cetera, and we're really making some inroads, is to shift the department's focus from purely regulatory and having a shambok on hitting us to growth. And the minister, it's easy to talk generally. It's easy to say you have to sort out Eskom. But each commodity has its own set of circumstances. And I worked a little bit in steel. My biggest problem is they all each other's clients and buyers, so they are at war with each other. I don't think we are. I think that's an important difference, but we are different. I mean, coal and iron ore and to a degree chrome are different from platinum and gold, etc. So, and we created, because of the leadership and our President, Mr. Mgojo, is really one of the great thinkers, strategic thinkers, created commodity think tanks, leadership groups. Their job is to think 25 years ahead. So in all the interactions with the Minister, Mantashe, we said to him, but you have to come down to the commodity side. And we have had that. We've seen him on virtually all the different commodities, showing the potential, showing the constraints, and trying to advise on the possible actions that can be taken to change that. And we know, and we don't want the department to be doubled in size, but we said to him, give us a coal champion and a platinum champion. If you let's take platinum for a second. I mean, platinum, virtually everything centers around marketing of platinum. And we've been talking about a platinum coin, and I mean, we're just the biggest producer of platinum, but we don't have a platinum coin. You can imagine the different agreements and steps that you have to go through, as against coal, where you say, please, Transnet, let's get more coal to the Richards Bay terminal, because India wants the coal. So that debate is taking place. We think the minister is not only fighting with us, but he has to change that engine, that DMR engine, around as well, with new thinking and this perspective that maybe like DTI, and maybe it's not a good comparison, but DTI's whole role is to try and foster manufacturing. Why can't we have that approach towards mining? And mining is, and I'll stop there, mining is 7% of GDP. The three other sectors that are crucial for us is transport and logistics. And by the way, transport and logistics is more than 40% of our intermediate cost. The other one is construction, because we use a lot of open cast, a lot of the open cast mines use contractors, and they were virtually civil engineering, earth moving companies. And the fourth one is steel and engineering. Combined, if you look directly, they're 27% of the GDP contribution to the country. We buy from each other, so you multiply, you can't have it as 2, but it's probably 1.5. You're talking about 40% of the economy. I had a very interesting request the other day to talk to Tiger Brands. I said, why do you want to talk to me? No, they wanted to know what is the impact of mining on them. And I had a look at it. If you look at these 4 sectors in the economy and how much they are paying to employees, in other words, contributing to the consumption expenditure of the economy. It's 25% of consumption expenditure in the economy. We earn 25% of the country's foreign exchange. So, and I mean, you probably know that as good as I do, so let me not hammer that point. But the minister started to understand that. I remember a discussion, and I don't know whether you were there, Steve, with the governor of the Reserve Bank, and he was quite worried when the platinum strike was on. He's saying, but we need to earn the foreign exchange. And he understands that. He made the joke when we walked in. He said, you know what, and it was at this period where I can't remember which quarter it was, but only mining and agriculture were growing. And he said, you know what, you guys were growing and we're doing everything possible to stop that from happening again. You understand I mean, it's a joke, and it doesn't have any meaning, but it does have actually meaning. The attitude is shifting, and the work is going on to get us in the right regulatory space, and we need to quickly start to invest. That was, and we produced a little pocketbook for the mining endowment, and my department is responsible for that. And the first data point in there says we grew by 1.2% last year because we didn't have the fourth quarter. The fourth quarter was an absolute disaster last year, so we actually declined by 1.8%. But the understanding, I hope, and the to a degree education that we feed the knowledge of how this sector fits into the overall economy, I think will bear fruit in future. And just to finish off again with the legal side, is the other part of the charter that we are concerned about is the targets for procurement. But initially we thought, and that's the part of the charter from 1 to 3 that didn't change virtually at all. And we know that some of that targets we can't reach, but we have very little evidence. Nobody actually has evidence that what we could and what we couldn't reach. So we're asking the minister to tell us how they got to those targets. We thought it as a threat, and perhaps in some instances it is. But as we started thinking about it, and the coding systems that were introduced as one of the clauses, we also realized that there is huge potential for saving in the procurement and supply chain practices that we have. Some of the actual examples are 20% changes. We know worldwide, in some cases, it's more than 40%. Now, we buy 250 to 300 billion rands worth of intermediary demand in the South African economy. Put 15% on that, all of a sudden, you actually have profitability boosted by something like that. So I've talked all over the place, but I hope I give you a sense of, I'm actually quite excited, but if we don't work hard and together, it can go off the rails. So I thought the previous panel was fantastic. All of what they were saying were true. I think the intention is to get it right. And if we can contribute to that, we would be able to do it. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Questions? No, so comprehensive that. Elise?
My question is to him. So from one economist to another, if you had to, thanks, list me maybe 3 flags, developments in the mining industry that if we see that happening in the next 6 to 12 months, that's a thumbs up for government making progress to assist the mining industry in your challenges and in the contribution to the GDP. What would those flags be?
Well, the first one is certainly what happens to commodity prices in the exchange rate. Now, you won't believe, we also put together a weighted average, like an exchange rate, a weighted average rand commodity price index. The Reserve Bank has been using a dollar-based one for a long time. That has been improving for a year. It's been improving for a year. The other reality, and the sad reality, is that it looks over the last about 15 years that there's been a 12 to 18 months lag before the improvement of commodity prices actually resulted in production improving. We are at that point. If you look at the relationships mechanically, we have to turn now. I am not so certain that it'll happen. the other side of it is that we, if you look at the, unfortunately the Reserve Bank, because the move from statistics from them to the statistics SA, you don't get quarterly fixed investment data now anymore. You have to look at the financial reports, the quarterly financial reports. Fixed investment has improved quite substantially, quarterly. So, and that was one of the things that made me thought, but maybe because investment started to improve, that the growth rate will continue, and that's why we completely fell off the table. So if that continues, there is then, in my view, in their minds, that if we don't do it now, we would not be able to do it, and there are some announcements that said, we don't think we're going to put the money down because of all the uncertainties, then it would continue. I would think the third one is coming back to the legal side. If we can solve amicably this continuing consequences thing. I remember in that the same meeting with the governor, one of the members said, I need to put in at least $5 to $10 billion, but I don't know whether I'll own the resource when I get there. Now that is true for water. There's a huge, Steve mentioned it, in the Northern Cape. There is huge problems with water provision in the Northern Cape. It is true for Transnet. It is true for Eskom. It is true for the harbors. We, in a sense, if you sit in the workings, this initiative that Rolf Meyer and Johan van Zyl is doing with the presidency, the PPGI or something, all the other sectors are saying, for example, agriculture is saying, but you have to sort electricity out because we're losing, if the cooling systems go off, we lose everything. And food processing is one of the biggest components of manufacturing, if you haven't known that. All of them are pointing to one or two more of these administered prices. We have all of them. And that, it is a big task. I mean, I thought I was going to be on the energy panel, but I mean, that is really a difficult story. And we, as the miners, are really trying to make an impact. This technical group, sorry, I'm abusing my time now. This technical group that went to the power stations as a peer review type of effort, because our guys know how to run these big smelters, etc. The minister actually got confirmation of some of the things that he knew, but he also got other things like that there's actually a big shortage of technical people at the power station. So we've done that. We have had intense discussions on the coal supply side. Our companies contributed, I think, something like 12 or 15 million tons of coal extra to get Eskom on a level that they won't have the problem that they don't have coal. So we're saying that there are things wrong, but we're really trying to make a contribution as well. Sorry, a long-winded economist answer.
My question's for Lily. I remember in the past you talking about the corruption at the regional DMR offices and the difficulties in getting any rights, whether they're prospecting or mining rights, approved. I don't know if in your practice, have you seen any more right applications, whether they're prospecting, whether they're mining rights? Have you seen rights being granted? Any of that evidence that we're looking for from your side?
So I must say that there has been quite a significant initiative from head office at the DMR to try and clean out any corruption, and they've made a statement to say that if anybody is aware of any kind of corruption, please, it must be made out in the open, or it must be told to somebody at the department. They have closed the Mpumalanga office as well, because apparently that was the worst and hit. So they have, and I know that they have a task team that is cleaning that, basically going from top to bottom to ensure that there are no double granting of rights off the back of unlawful applications, etc. So, and we have seen a difference in that regard. Whether there's been a total clean out, I don't think that is the case, but there's definitely a shift and a positive move towards clearing out corruption. There are also companies are taking each other on if there is a double granting of right, through this appeal process that is provided, and to try and again expose any type of corruption. And there has been, I've seen one or two in the media, and also just one or two that I've been dealing with that has in fact exposed certain corruption. A couple of people at the DMR have in fact lost their jobs as a result of this being exposed. There have been a couple of internal investigations done and investigation reports provided. So there is definitely a move away from just that complicit behavior that happened in the past to trying to air out any of this type of corruption. I hope that that's answered your question. Yes, definitely. There are new applications that have been submitted. There are new rights that have been granted. And there's a bit of a blockage at the Mpumalanga region with respect to amendments to rights, but they are processing Section 11 transfers. They're processing various other applications. So, yes, we are.
Hi. Hi, it's me again. And I think these two questions, I'm happy if any of the panelists can actually take it. The first question is, I get the sense from the panelists that they are actually quite comfortable, particularly with Gwede Mantashe as the minister, and quite a lot of ground has been covered in restoring trust between the industry, the communities, and other other stakeholders within the mining industry. What is your view, in your opinion, with particularly on the Kolobeni matter, and how the character and the personality of Gwede Mantashe has handled that particular conflict? And does that not then now put a threat to the trust, to that element of trust between communities where the mining industry would want to go to, and the mines? And secondly, if it were not Gwede Mantashe who would then now be appointed as a minister of minerals energy, which other minister would the industry be comfortable with?
Second one's hard.
Thanks. Before we close off the questions, I have two for each of you and also your closing statements. Should the department or the ministry remain separate, or should it be amalgamated and restructured with another one? Because everyone wants the president to reduce the size of cabinet and the executive and all of that. And second, the role of labor. Are labor costs just unsustainably high in this country? Is there a moral imperative around mine bosses' relationships with labor? And is there potential for disruption on behalf of the unions?
Let's see, there's a question.
It's the very last question.
Thank you.
And then we close.
Stephen, I'm glad you saw me because this question is for you. You mentioned that you were part of the, I guess you could call it Mining Charter Season 1, the short part of Season 2, and then obviously Mining Charter Season 3. What were the concerns with the first one? 2, is this the final one? I guess my concern is that, speaking to investors, you have to give them surety that, or assurance that this is a sustainable place to invest your money. And we've had different presidents with different ministers and different mining charters. Is this the final one, and how do we know that?
Well, it's the final one. I hope so. When we did Mining Charter 1, we were told and assured that goalposts will not change. And they changed. But fortunately, we were involved in Mining Charter 2, and we said, okay, tell us why you want to change this charter. It had reached its maturity, of course. and we negotiated another one. So I don't know. I hope we don't change because it's not good for certainty and security of tenure to keep on changing the regulatory regime. But the concerns in Mining Charter 1 were quite obvious because we're coming from the old mining ownership regime and regulatory regime where there was a dual private as well as state ownership of mineral rights, and that the owner of the land would naturally have owned the mineral rights too, and would sign a lease agreement with the mining company that wants to mine there. But the most important thing in Mining Charter 1 was that historically disadvantaged people did not have access to the mining industry. It was exclusively the previously advantaged. So therefore, if you look at Section 2 of the Minerals and Petroleum Resources Development Act, it says that one of the objectives of the mining of the act was to create access of the historically disadvantaged people into the mining industry and to promote economic development and sustainability. So that was the major one. The gravamen of Mining Charter 1 was to transform the industry. The Mining Charter 2, the industry was sort of in the process of transformation and therefore was to perfect that regulatory regime. Charter 3 looks at, has it worked, where did it not work? That was problematic because there were a lot of more debates than they happened in Mining Charter 1, but at least we managed to find, I would say 80% of agreement in Mining Charter 3. But whether it is the final one, it won't change again, I really wouldn't put my bet on not changing. But I hope it does not continue to perpetuate uncertainty. Just to answer that question about Xolobeni, people who know the Xolobeni problem, it's a very complex one. Not Gwede, not anyone will easily solve that problem. I briefly dealt with that when I was still sitting on the minerals board of the minister under Minister Sonjit. But it was towards the end of our term as board members, so we did not complete that task, but we did some consultations to find out what is the problem, what would be the likely solution. I can tell you, it is difficult. And now whether Gwede did it right or wrong, perhaps at the beginning he did not do it right, but when he went there to consult, he was chased away, and people already had adopted certain positions and attitude towards him because they were already very angry. I don't know whether he can salvage that situation. It's a complex problem. Because some people say we want mining, some people say we don't want mining, we want tourism in this area. So whatever happens there, either you agree with this side or don't agree with this, because you won't have both there. So that is a big problem. The Gwede element or the no Gwede element just happens to be by the way. It's a difficult one. And
yeah, I tend to agree. Just to add to that, I think just on is this the last mining charter? There's talk about amending the actual act in a couple of years' time as had been proposed under with that initial MPRD bill. To split out the petroleum sections from the mining specific regulations and the mining specific sections. And I think that although the principles of the mining charter may not change, the form, it may be brought into legislation. There's a lot of speculation around all of this at the moment, but I do believe that this is not going to be the last version or form. That's from discussions with the industry around mining charter. But again, this is a 5 to 10 year plan. Whether I think there was a question about the next minister and whether the department, who the next minister will be.
Zwani.
Yeah. That is a real thumbsuck. I wish there was some kind of, and I haven't seen it, I'm not sure if you have, but I have not seen any kind of inclination to who it may be. There's speculation that maybe Jeff Radebe,
If perhaps it is not
Gwede.
Gwede. Yeah,
who else would
be a good
the industry be comfortable with? Because I get the sense that with Mr. Mantashe in particular, there's been this quite good relationships that have been built.
Yes.
But obviously the prerogative remains and lies with the president.
But can I term that? It's a very difficult one to answer because there are quite a number of people who could easily occupy that department. But I can say the kind of a minister that we want is a minister who number one, makes it his business to understand the industry, the challenges in the industry, how to make it sustainable, engages with the industry and all the stakeholders of the industry, including the unions, including the communities, and all the stakeholders like Gwede has been doing. And the door is open. His problems are our problems are his problems, and therefore we can sort out issues together. It's a personality and the technical skills that are, let me not say technical, the skills that are required to run a department of this nature. But there was a question about our view about whether the GMR should be joined with another department. I don't see any department that is suitable to pair with the GMR except energy.
energy. I agree.
But if you were to ask me, my preference, at least for the next 5 years, is to keep them separate. There are big challenges with energy. We have got ESCOM, we've got that, and it's a big animal to handle at this stage to mix it with another department. Otherwise, you're going to be defocusing on the challenges facing this country. Equally speaking, the DMR and the industry it is regulating is in an upward trajectory of change. You don't want to break that momentum and defocus it again. Because it's so important for the GDP of this country and the economic growth of this country, that is the GMR, so is the energy itself, because the country relies on the power. Without that, this country is dead completely. So these departments over time have grown and grown, not only in terms of size, but also in terms of problems. So to combine them, you are defocusing and you need them separate, for a while at least.
Yes, I think I agree. I mean, I echo exactly. The Department of Energy would probably be the most likely, as it was in the past.
Yeah.
The Department of Minerals and Energy, until it was split. But I think it does come with its own issues, as Steve was
Yeah,
mentioning.
I tend to agree with that. Let me try to answer the labor part. And I want to go back to the mining pakisa that happened, unfortunately, before my time. I'm only 3 years in the mining sector. That's proved, if you look at the data now, it's proven to be absolutely spot on for the different. It looked in the long term where, given commodity prices, et cetera, of where the different commodities would go. And we are at a turning point where we have a choice of making it, keeping it on working, extending the life. We are one of the oldest mining jurisdictions in the world, or break it. And some of the interactions and the contestations that took place, you see that. And it differs substantially. I mean, gold is the highest labor intensive. Coal is probably the lowest. Coal is 20%. Gold mining is higher than 50. So it depends on where you are and what the technologies, potentials are, et cetera, But I think it's been difficult but controllable.
Thank you. And so we break for lunch.